Take care of business and don't hold back. Taking care of your health shouldn't be any different. You know when something's off. Don't ignore symptoms like fatigue, joint pain, and rashes. Listen to your body. It could be lupus. We're here to help you take control. Learn how at BeFierceTakeControl.org. Brought to you by the Lupus Foundation of America and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Good Friday morning, everyone. This is Vickie Sawyer here. Just grateful and thankful that I can continue to be your state senator, serving you in Raleigh. And oh my gosh, what a week it was. Before we get into the week, I do want to prep that at the bottom of the hour, we are going to have an attorney, Larry Sheehan, to come on, and we're going to talk, as promised, about what is growth and what are property rights, and why is it that we continue to have all of this growth, and why is it not aligned with traffic, and just really take a legal perspective, as promised a couple weeks ago, so that we can better understand the state of North Carolina and how it absolutely handles the growth and population that is coming in, and get a legal perspective as to why some of these decisions are made. But wow, this first 30 minutes, you are welcome to call into the show. Happy to have your questions at 704-873-1400. And let me tell you, this week started out with a bang, and then another bang, and it was just busy and wonderful with tons of activity. So let's go into really what the Supreme Court, now this is the United States Supreme Court, came down with a couple of rulings that really did shake the Raleigh world. And one was the Moore versus Harper. Now, as you guys know, that we are in North Carolina and we draw districts, in other words, voting districts, I feel like every 2 years. And then they go into the court system. And then the court will either appoint a special master, meaning someone who will supposed to be not partisan, to come in and draw districts, which they did our last time around. But because the court had drawn the districts before, we again will be redrawing districts in the grand tradition of North Carolina politics, and that will happen towards the end of this year. But in part of the reason why we've been waiting is to see that this Moore versus Harper Supreme Court ruling and what that would say. So there is this theory, and what was being tested is the independent state legislature theory, meaning that we constitutionally, as the General Assembly, have been charged with drawing our district elections. Now, district voting districts. Now, of course, there are rulings about how and why you can't just do like maybe some legislators back in the 80s did and do that snake district through the heart of Statesville for Mel Watt. I know many of you remember that. So what we did do, though, is there was a court case that said that the state courts cannot rule on federal congressional maps. Remember, this isn't about mine or Representative McNeely or Mills districts. This was all about the federal maps. And the Speaker Moore's position was that it is constitutionally the job of the state legislature, not the state court. Well, Justice Roberts keeps bringing down some questionable decisions, and I kind of feel like this one was one of them. But then in his opinion, he authored it and says that the courts can hold the state legislator accountable and review the maps and possibly redraw. So that came down this week. Now, that's not the U.S. Supreme Court. It was talking specifically about the state Supreme Court. So right now, the state Supreme Court has a 5-2 Republican majority. I don't know that this ruling really has any to it. This next election cycle, we do have a Supreme Court that has signaled that they will and believe in the independent state legislator theory, and that we are the ones to draw the maps. So I feel like we were waiting to have this come out before we do map drawing. And since map drawing is so much fun, we're going to move on to something else the Supreme Court said. And that was something that you guys have seen splashed everywhere. This was about UNC Chapel Hill, Harvard, using race as a one factor into having students be admitted to their colleges. Interesting enough, one of the groups that was the main driver behind this were not folks who are white, but actually folks who are Chinese or Asian. They felt that they were there and their merit was good enough that they should be admitted to Harvard and Chapel Hill. You know, kids are working hard, they're making great grades, and they fit every category that these institutions have asked for as far as their ACT scores and SAT scores and great grades. But because they weren't identified as a specific minority, they were left out of the admissions process. And so this is something that the Supreme Court did come down and say that the policies that have historically benefited Black and Latino students, that this is absolutely should be abandoned. However, there's a caveat. So you'll hear like, this is the worst thing ever, and it's taking affirmative action out of it. And really, no, it's just saying that if you check a box that you are a certain minority, it doesn't give you any more benefit to admissions than any other. However, Justice Roberts comes in again. He said that the applicants could share in essays, also know how their heritage or culture motivated them to take on a leadership role. So they're saying you can't check the box and get special or preferential treatment, but you can write a story about the box that used to be checked, and that can be used as admission criteria. So this has been a long watched court case. It's interesting. I do support the ruling. I think it should be merit-based, that your admission to a college or university should be based on your merit and blind merit. I mean, I don't think you should even have legacy consideration. If your mom or dad went to a specific school, that you should get preferential treatment. I mean, college is competitive for a reason. It should be there for those who are able and ready to do it. And so that has just been a big court case that has come out, and I'm very grateful that it had worked out that way, because I do feel like college should be open to all and accept those who are based on their merit. So those are kind of the big two U.S. Supreme Court rulings. It is the ruling season for the Supreme Court, and you guys have seen a lot about that. Monday night actually was very interesting in Raleigh. I don't think we have a caller. I thought I saw something. Okay. You are welcome to call in at 704-873-1400. We will not be taking calls after the break when Larry comes on, but feel free to call in and ask your questions if you should like. Now, Monday night was very interesting. We hardly ever have a Senate meeting on Monday night. We usually do some busy work, but not a meeting. But Monday night in the Rules Committee, which I sit on, we listened to 21 speakers talk about a bill that we are doing to ban what they call gender-affirming care for kids who are less than 18 years old. So it's House Bill 808, and it's just saying that, if you identify however you want to identify, your parents are there with you, whatever that is, okay, but you are still developing as a young person. And in some states, or some studies show that, our brains are not even emotionally or physically mature until age 25. And I kind of think maybe it's age 40 for some people, but okay, so the medical science says 25. And so they're allowing some of the institutions, especially Duke University and some UNC Healthcare, possible ECU, are doing this gender affirming care for minors. Now, what does that care mean? That means double mastectomy in some cases. And we have seen pictures of young biological females who have had their breast removed before age 18. And this bill says, after 18, you're an adult, you do what you want to do. But before 18, you're still developing. You cannot get a tattoo. You cannot do a lot of things. You can't buy cigarettes that will harm your body. There are things that just young children should not be able to do, and then forever mutilating their physical being because of an emotional reaction to something that they've been told is happening to their body is not where we want to go as North Carolina. But I do know that there is a caller on the line. I'm grateful to hear your question. Thank you for calling in.
Well, good morning. Well, first of all, I kind of agree with the 18 thing, at least that.
Okay.
I just think we should let evolution evolve on that subject. But you're going to be speaking to the gentleman later. My questions are, can he touch on the deregulated headlights and how bright they are and how they fit in with this whole traffic thing?
Okay.
I do know there's a new term called traffic violence that isn't really out and about yet, but it's different than a traffic accident.
Okay.
But I do want to say also on the same subject, let's not wait for officials. We're all officials when it comes to courtesy and driving nicely and not combating each other when we're going through these changes. And I'll stop there.
Oh, no, thank you. No, I appreciate that. Common sense and reason will always rule the day. And I know that none of us are perfect, although I pray for perfection every day and I fail miserably. But yeah, so sometimes people just don't do the right thing on the road. And it doesn't mean that they are terrible people that deserve to be, taken pictures of, slammed on social media and been nasty to one another. And I thank you for that. I appreciate what you're saying.
Yeah, well, have your American dream. Just don't crap out a bunch of nightmares on other people on the way.
I love that. I'm going to take that if you don't mind.
Yeah, take it and use it because, we're the laughing stock right now. We're all fighting amongst ourselves, and they need to see what America is, and it's changing right now. We'll just call it that.
Great. Well, I appreciate your comments. Those are very well taken, and I really love that. Thank you for calling the show. That's right.
I see that you're moving. You're a stable woman. Thank you for your time.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I like that. Have your American dream and just don't, ruin and create nightmares for the rest of us. That is fantastic. I'm going to use that. I do hear that we have another caller on the line. Welcome to the show. You're on the phone with Vickie Sawyer. Oh, I think we're going to have to drop you. There was a little bit of background noise there. So I do appreciate you trying to call in. Feel free to call back and turn your radio down. So going back to just a couple takeaways. Listening to the testimony from 21 different public speakers, and there were public speakers on both sides of this issue. Now, there was one woman who came, and I really appreciate, she was very articulate, just like our last caller, and she said, all kids are trans. And I went, what are you talking about? And then she said, by definition, all kids are trans. They are transitioning from childhood to adulthood. It is a natural process that we all go through, and adolescence, its very definition, is a transitioning phase. And to make permanent and altering modifications to your body as it is changing will basically sterilize you or make a permanent decision about your sexual health for the rest of your life. I mean, you're talking about basically sterilizing young men and women based on an emotional event that they're having during adolescence. And I don't know if you guys remember adolescence. I sure do. I was a buck-toothed, poor kid who had terrible haircut and acne all over her face. And I didn't like what I saw when I looked in the mirror. God, my heart goes out to those folks who are in this situation now. But if I were to have made permanent decisions about my health and my body based on my emotions as an adolescent, I think I would be really upset later in life. I do know that we have another caller. I welcome you to the phone. I welcome you to the radio. You're on with Vickie Sawyer.
Good morning, Vickie. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for calling.
Listen, I had a lady call in earlier this week on the Todd Starnes show. I don't know if you're familiar with him out in Memphis, but
yes, sir.
She evidently is a mother of a transgender child. Mm-hmm. And these people that are acting as transgenders, some of them may be, some of them may not be, I don't know. But what they're doing is nonsense. And they're making some of these people that are transgender legitimately look bad, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
As a child, I don't know if somebody is born with other parts or not. I don't know if that can happen. I guess it could. Mm-hmm. But I think what the woman was trying to get her point across was that her child had some kind of informality in the brain, a brain defect, possibly thinking that she's a boy when she's a girl or vice versa. And I think that's what we need to try to be open-minded to on that. These people that are prancing around naked on the White House lawn and other places, that's just nonsense.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I'm open-minded to the fact that there are some people in this world, Vickie, that are legitimately transgender.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's right, whether I agree with it, doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
We're all easy to put a question where God puts a period, and we're all guilty of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that transgender people will have that discussion with the Lord when their time has come.
Mm-hmm.
And while we're here on earth, we just need to try to, I don't know, like the man said a long, long time ago, can't we all get along? But evidently that can't happen because there's just too many people that are narrow-minded out here.
That's right. That is, yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate the call, and I do agree that there is a there's confluence of words that say that just because I'm a conservative and I'm a mother, that somehow, and I'm working to make sure and protect young children from being forever mutilated, that I am do not agree or understand or am uncomfortable by people who are trans. That is not the case whatsoever. Our God teaches us to love everybody, and I absolutely do. So do not conflate my protection or my support of protecting young children from mutilating their body from somehow thinking we're going to erase out this population of people. That is not the case. That is not the case at all. The case is just to say, and so that's where I think what you're talking about is the people who are dancing lewdly on the White House lawn continue to just look at all of us who are on the conservative side and call us actually, we were called bigots on the floor this week.
Well, I just want to add to it, Vickie, that, I may not agree with your politics all the time, but that doesn't mean I hate you.
Right.
And the same thing goes for Joe Biden or anybody else or Republican side Democrat. It's not about that. And I think that's what people just because they make up their mind that they don't agree with somebody's actions or somebody's ways, that they automatically just want to go to the hate side.
Yeah.
And that's just not right.
Right.
I don't think that's what God would want us to do.
That's right. I appreciate that. And you know what? Thank you, as always. Thank you so much for calling and providing some insight, because it's nice to hear from you on that. So
you and your family have a good Fourth.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your time.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And, it is a nice time to reflect on the American dream. I'm glad the first caller had mentioned that and what he had just said, that it is okay to disagree. That is actually the beauty of America, is we have different opinions in different ways, and we oftentimes talk about that in the government space where we're at, or in the political square, which has now become this social media toxicity thing. It is okay to disagree, but not hate, and that's exactly where we are. And so during that Rules Committee meeting, there was a mother up there tearfully exclaiming how her 2-year-old child is confused about their identity, their sexual identity. 2 years old. 2. Now, this mother was saying that she is, I'm going to basically accuse us of not allowing this gender affirming care for a 2-year-old, that we are going to create that child to commit suicide. That is what we hear over and over and over again. My response back to that is, they're 2, or they're 4, or they're 6. They should be out there figuring out how to stack blocks, or how to go to the bathroom independently, or how to do all of these things that are basic motor function skills, and develop and be young children, and stop sexualizing kids. Who cares if a little girl wants to wear a boy's outfit or vice versa? I know there's a lot of boys who played with Barbies. It doesn't mean that they want to permanently take away part of their anatomy in order to fulfill this somehow social construct of a 2-year-old having a gender dysphoria. Just when you sit there and you think about that, what is going on there? Let kids be kids. And that's another thing that we got slammed on this week in the General Assembly on the Republican side, is we passed the Parents' Bill of Rights. Now, we talked about this a couple months ago, but it is basically legislation to say a lot of different things. One is that don't talk about or do not put into kindergarten through fourth grade curriculum. That means what your lesson plan will be that day about sexual identity or anything. That means heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, any of that stuff. Just don't talk about sex in the curriculum. Now, if you read the bill, that's all it says. But what we heard, again, is that confluence. Remember that idea that somehow if you are a Republican, then you hate people who are gay. That is the most troublesome thing I've heard, because that is absolutely not the case. What we're saying is if that kid is 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, don't put into curriculum talking about sex. Now, if they have a question and it naturally comes up, the teacher is absolutely fine to say, well, maybe Vickie does have 2 moms, and why don't you ask your mom about that? That's all we're saying. Those are values and stuff that should be instilled in the family, whatever your family looks like. If it has 1 mom or no moms or 2 dads or a mom and a dad, that is your family values. These are my children. I do not need a government employee, as well intended as they are, to socialize my kids for a government construct. This is not co-parenting. I need you to help me teach that child how to become a good citizen by being able to understand the difference between how to write the letter D and a letter B, not learn about the differences between all of these different family constructs. That is for me and my family to raise our children with our values. And that's what makes America great. And that's exactly what this Parents' Bill of Rights says. It also says something that we got very hit on. Going back to this transgender thing, right now, if your child decides at school that they're going to come out as trans, then they can tell the teacher or the administrators that they want to be called a him instead of a her, or a her instead of a him. And they also can choose to be called a different name. So for me, I would be asked to be called Victor instead of Victoria. And so they're saying that it is not right for the school to tell the parents that your child is asking to be identified by a different name than was given to them at birth, or a different sex which was identified to them at birth. They're saying now listen, if that same child comes up to you and say, God forbid, she should be pregnant, or if she should have other kind of issues, the first thing that is in the playbook is to call the parent. But for some reason, if that child says that they identify as a boy and they want to be, and they are a girl, or vice versa, they don't want the school to tell the parent. That's not right. If my child comes and she is absolutely having this, asking for her to be called a him, I want to know, because the premise is that because we were told this on the Senate floor this week, because we are conservative families, then we will hate our children, we will abuse them, and we will not love them as we should. I am here to tell you that is not the case. These are our children, not your children. If my child comes and she is asking to be called a boy, you better tell me, because I want to know. I'm going to love on her. We're going to work through this. We're going to talk to professional help and counselors in our faith community. We as a family and our values will work through it. But somehow just saying that because I am a white conservative, that I hate people who are gay and I would abuse my child if she or he should turn out to be gay or transgender is absolutely the bigot part. I will say that again. They are accusing us of exactly of what they are. They are absolutely putting a social warfare on us as white Republicans or as black Republicans or anybody who has a Republican name that supports this Parents' Bill of Rights, and that is absolutely not the case. We're saying these are our kids, not your kids. We know what's best for our family, and we need to be in the right and be told. So after the break, we're going to have attorney Larry Sheehan on. We're going to talk all things property rights, and I'm looking forward to listening to see what Larry has to say. Thank you for listening. This is Senator Vickie Sawyer.
high near 88. Tonight, partly cloudy, the low 70. For Friday, sunny with a slight chance of showers and a high near 89. Mike Jackson, WSIC News.
Well, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for listening to our first part of the show. Now we are going on to something with a more of a local flair. It was questions that had come up in regards to traffic and growth and, what is going on and what legally can happen. And I did a terrible job explaining the legal portion. And at that time, I had said, we need to get an attorney who understands the North Carolina law in regards to property rights and growth on. And that's when I reached out to my friend, Larry Shaheen. Now, Larry is an attorney with the McIntosh Law Firm, which is located in Davidson, North Carolina. And I first got acquainted to McIntosh Law Firm about maybe 15 years ago when I played co-ed softball, and they would continually beat the pants off of us all the time. I hated seeing them on the schedule because I knew they were going to bring in some ringers, but that was the first time. But their firm has been well established and does a wonderful job out of Davidson, North Carolina, and Larry is one of their attorneys that serves with them. And not only does Larry do a lot of things in his professional career as far as property rights and land development, he's also a strong Republican who is active in the party at the local and the state level. If you were at the Republican convention, you saw him running around and doing procedural orders and being at the microphone trying to keep the trains on the track, and he did a great job with that. But he also has a stellar Twitter presence. You can follow his tweets at Lawrence Shaheen, and that's LAWRENCESHAHEEN, and you can follow his tweets because he does a great job, and I think he is on the phone. But this is my favorite part of Larry's Twitter. His disclaimer is personal musings of an urban conservative attorney who loves Charlotte and North Carolina. Opinions are my own, so don't punish my clients with them. They suffer enough. And with that, thank you so much for calling the show, Larry. I appreciate you coming on and talking all things property with us today.
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
I can hear you very well. I was just giving them the rundown of your professional career at McIntosh Law Firm in Davidson, and that you specialize in property rights and land development, but also your strong work as a Republican. I guess not really a lone wolf, but there's not very many in Mecklenburg County, but you are a prolific tweeter, and you have asked them to follow you because you do a lot of things in regards to holding truth to power in the Charlotte region, especially when it comes to transportation and the uniform development ordinances. So I appreciate your Twitter and everything that you do.
Oh, thank you, ma'am. We're also we're so grateful to have you up there in the state Senate. I got to tell you, we could not have a better advocate for our communities up there, helping make sure that that they're getting what they need just to keep growing and keep being the best place to live, work, and raise a family. So
thank you.
I appreciate you saying that, but my gosh, we couldn't do what we're doing without you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So now we're going to get into some areas. I'd kind of given you an idea of what we want to talk about, but we had someone call in maybe about 4 weeks ago and had asked specifically these questions. And I am not a lawyer. I seem to be around a lot of them, you being one of them. And I said, I promised that we would get someone who deals in this professionally to help us understand where we are in North Carolina, specifically in the North Meck and Southern Iredell region. And you have got a unique view on that because you've been so active for so long. But when we talk about this, and I kind of even say it flippantly, but then I started digesting, I don't know that I truly understand. So explain to me, we often hear North Carolina is a property rights state. I mean, what does that mean? How are we different from other states that aren't? Just kind of give me an overview of what does that mean, property rights state?
Well, in terms of property rights state, it's important to talk about first, of course, the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution. Mm-hmm. You got to start there. Everything when you talk about public property with private property and public property and the way in which it's all worked out, you have to start with the Fifth Amendment, because the Fifth Amendment states that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Those two items there establish a national limitation upon the ability of states, localities, and our national government to either deprive an individual of their property without a due process, nor take a private property for a public use without just compensation. So those two items, set the boundaries by which all of our states and governments have to follow. But then ultimately, when you get from that to the North Carolina Constitution, the North Carolina Constitution is very, very clear, specifically in section, when you get down to I'm going to come to the section here on property. Section, let me make sure I get to the right one here.
No, take your time.
The North Carolina Constitution is very clear about what you can and cannot do with property. So when you get to that, you're talking about Section 19 of the first article, Law of the Land and Equal Protection of the Laws. No person shall be taken, imprisoned, or diseased of his freehold, liberties, or privileges, or outlawed or exiled, or in any manner deprived of his life, liberty, or property, but by the law of the land. No person shall be denied the protection of laws, nor shall any person be subjected to discrimination by the state because of race, color, religion, or national origin. So when you take that section and then you apply it to what's gone on in North Carolina over the last, I want to say about 9 years, has been the leading state in the country in terms of cases that have come out from our Supreme Court on how individuals with private property are dealt with the North Carolina Department of Transportation and condemnation. And it has created a situation where, yes, it has increased the cost of the price of land, but it has also kept the state from improperly taking land and improperly imposing fees on individuals for the necessary infrastructure that comes along with developing that land. And, our Chief Justice, Paul Newby, is actually the author of two of those cases. The first is the Kirby case, which of course dealt with the MAP Act, and then the second case is the fact that in North Carolina, there was a case that was ruled on impact fees, and that case was the case that actually came out and changed the way that local governments are allowed to assess fees against developers. So that specific case and the Carthage case in that specific instance, the municipality they were dealing with was the town of Carthage against Quality Built Homes. The North Carolina Supreme Court said that they couldn't assess impact fees. So these types of cases that continue to come out of our Supreme Court on both, and it's both sides of the aisle. Both sides of the aisle have a very strong view of property rights because ultimately you wind up with situations where, the government, and we're talking about the government here with a capital G. We're not talking about Republican or Democrat governor.
Right.
We're talking about government. Government tends to run rampant over individuals when they feel like they've got something they want to do. And property rights, in some instances, wind up being insignificant little things that they try to trample over. But it's important that the Constitution and the law is there to make sure that people are not dispossessed of their property across the entire spectrum, whether you're rich or poor, whether you're white or black, whether you're anybody, that the government does not improperly take your land for just compensation.
That is such a good point. And you hit on another question that we are going to kind of go into, because we hear, especially from those who move from out of state, why is it that we cannot charge an impact fee? And then for the listeners, like you and I maybe throw around impact fee, but really, first of all, define what an impact fee is, and then go back and talk about that, not the Kirby case, but the other case, the Carthage case, about what went wrong with impact fees and why were they ruled against at the North Carolina Supreme Court level.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that North Carolina, unlike other states, it has a different governmental structure than most other governments across the country. Some places like Pennsylvania, Virginia, and a few others are commonwealths. Those commonwealths are groupings of governments that are large municipalities, all of which have home rule, and those counties and cities get together, and then they form the state government. Unlike that state, North Carolina was not created that way. North Carolina is governed under our Constitution, and our Constitution was created by a constitutional convention. There was one originally when it was first founded, and this most recent was in the 1860s. And in this most recent Constitution, there was an approach taken to local authority, which is called Dillon's Rule. Now, North Carolina is technically a modified Dillon's Rule state, but Dillon's Rule essentially is a rule it's named after a Supreme Court judge out of Iowa. And it's a rule where he established that state governments can create a narrow approach to local authority, essentially stating that local governments only have the powers expressly granted to them by the state, either through the Constitution or in law. So in North Carolina, in the specific case where you're dealing with the town of Carthage case, North Carolina had not explicitly given the cities the ability to assess impact fees. Now, impact fees are essentially what you would consider a charge assessed on new and sometimes existing development to fund current or future public infrastructure expenditures that are necessitated by the development. Let me give you a good example.
Mm-hmm.
So a good example of that would say, for example, you've got a large project down the street. Well, large project down the street is going to require a new pump station. Well, the town cannot tell the developer that you have to be able to build that pump station and pay for it before you go out there and get the rights to that development. Now, that can move about, and it's changed a little bit. And there was the ability. I'm not sure if you were there when they passed it or not, but they created a system development fee scheme in 2017, and it was updated again in 18, and then again in 20. That's created a limited ability to be able to assess for those future uses for infrastructure. Mm-hmm. But essentially, what wound up happening was cities across the state, and it was the Democrats, let's make no mistake, it was the Democrats who'd allowed all these localities to run roughshod over all these developers and tell them, hey, look, you can't, and local landowners, you can't build or sell or do anything with your land unless you pay to the government this cost, which is going to be required for you to develop. That's a local government function because technically everybody pays fees for water and sewer consistently and continually. So the problem was that they were being abused, and because there had never been an actual statute passed to allow for the assessment of those future development fees, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. And luckily, there was a compromise that came together around system development fees. But I'll tell you, my family in Belmont, we sued the town of Belmont over this, and we won. There was just recently another case in the city of Charlotte. The city of Charlotte got sued for how they were managing system development fees, and they had to change it. So it's a consistent issue, and it's funny because you know David Coble, and David and I work together consistently, and he's on your show all the time. And we both work. I'm general counsel, and he works as a consultant for the Real Estate Building Industry Coalition. Water sewer infrastructure is a consistent issue in this region, and we continually find that local governments, to their credit, are trying to find ways to pay for it, but the way to do that is not on the backs of the developers.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's a very good point. And you've articulately said exactly what I think we all need to understand a little bit better is that those fees are basically unconstitutional because you're limiting the ability of a landholder to sell their land without paying for almost like an illegal taking. Is that my pea brain way of saying that? Okay, good.
No, you have it exactly right. And it ties into the next thing I think you wanted us to talk about, which was inverse condemnation, which was the Kirby case essentially. Right. And then the MAP Act, and what the MAP Act was doing in the state of North Carolina, and why the Supreme Court had to roll that back.
Yeah, go right ahead. Let's go through those.
So the Kirby case spoke about a law that was called the MAP Act. The MAP Act was passed in North Carolina that allowed the Department of Transportation to prevent development of any piece of land if it fell within any potential project that they were planning over the course of a period of time. Mm-hmm. So what wound up happening was that you had all these people that owned all this land, and there were 4 or 5 different possibilities. The biggest example of it was in Wake County. And in Wake County, they were talking about doing 540. Well, 540 had 4 different routes. Well, for a number of years, the Department of Transportation held up every piece of land on every potential route, and they couldn't sell it, they couldn't develop on it, they couldn't do anything. And God bless DOT, as you well know, Madam Chair, they are great at a lot of things, but they are not great at making decisions in a timely process. Right. So they take their time. So these folks were unable to sell, they were unable to realize the value, and the Supreme Court, led by Justice Newby, decided that this was going to be considered what is called an inverse taking, which means that you have essentially taken the land of the individual without compensation by not allowing them to develop or sell the land. And they ruled that unconstitutional. So now at this point, say, for example, let's use Charlotte, for example. Charlotte has land they want to buy for a light rail that they say they're going to build. Okay, that's great, but the project's not funded. So anytime they go to a landowner to try to buy land along that route, the automatic response, and I do have clients that are in this issue, the automatic response is, well, the project isn't funded, you can't hold up development, here's the price we're willing to sell it to you for, this is the price. And if you don't want to take it at that price, my client's going to go develop it, and you can take it at the time at which you have funding to be able to realize the project.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I'm going to divert a little bit because you've been really active and are really great at keeping me informed about all of the issues with light rail and the CATS, which is the Charlotte Area Transit Authority or system. And, just really just the problem with that system and development. I mean, is it going into that? I mean, has it gotten any better? I mean, is it still continuing to flounder? Are you seeing some growth? And really for me, I mean, there's some market forces out there that may be changing how public transit operates in the future. And those are things called ride shares and, different, people don't necessarily want to get on a train anymore, but they could call up an Uber, And so just kind of give me your, layman's view of what's going on with that system.
Well, the Charlotte area transit system is a mess. There's just no way. There's no way to get around that. And I think everybody will agree. We have a wonderful individual, Ed Driggs, and I got to tell you, the mayor has been much better about it as well. But the problem we've got with CATS is that CATS at the moment is a city of Charlotte subdivision. Mm-hmm. It is run by the city manager, and the current CATS administrator is the former administrator that ran the airport. It is not the same gentleman, John Lewis, who ran it for years into the ground. And let's be clear. I want to go ahead and make it very, very clear. John Lewis and everybody who worked for him at CATS ran that system square into the ground, and it's as typified as it could be for the fact that his trains were falling off the track.
Right.
So,
right.
It was pretty darn bad.
Right.
But it has gotten significantly better in terms of accountability. Now, whether or not they're going to be able to move forward, I do have faith in the individual that they've named to run that. He's a good individual who knows what he's doing. But to a certain extent, the problems we have with CATS are going to continue to be problems primarily because, again, look, let's talk about this. This is an issue that drives me absolutely bonkers. We're a right-to-work state, right?
Right.
We are a non-union state. Charlotte Area Transit System contracts with a subunit of it, which is not a governmental entity, which is a management company, to be able to get around the fact that they want to allow their workers to unionize. Now, here's the fun part. The subdivision, the management company, which deals with the union, has allowed the union to essentially make it so that there is no way the bus system runs on time.
Right.
So their desire to work with the union is the reason why the bus system doesn't work, which is exactly the reason why we're a right-to-work state.
Right.
So it's like, okay, folks, you got yourselves into this mess. You got to get yourselves out of it.
Right.
And the obvious answer, it's not obvious to the activists sometimes in Charlotte, but it's obvious to the rest of us, is that, okay, terminate that contract, bring the management back in-house, hire everybody, and let's get them back to work. And let's make it so that these folks aren't having to deal with a union. Right. But again, it is amazing, and it's on both sides of the aisle. We all know this, but to a certain extent, it's the idea to be adhering to a principle is getting in the way of what should be happening, which is effective and efficient use of taxpayer resources to enact a service which you promised the people of this community you were going to. You tell me, are you going to take a rapid transit bus from Mooresville to Charlotte? I don't think I'm worried about it even getting there, whether it gets there on time.
Right. That's right. Yeah, no, that's a great point, too. And a lot of the counter, they'll say, well, in order to pull down federal funds, then we have to show that we have, dealt with unions. And a lot of that, the things that came out of the federal government for the IIJA actually is tied to you have to use unionized labor. Yep. And so at some point, though, I'm curious to see the return of investment on that. And if CATS would be better off just saying no thank you to any of those federal funds, because it to me seems like they may be not getting their return that they think that they are just because using those unions. So I know you and I can talk about transportation all day long. And so we're going to kind of get into that real quick. So as a segue, kind of get back on point. So sorry to hit you with the CATS thing, but I do appreciate your commentary on Twitter and sending me that stuff because it is It is literally a train wreck, right? It's literally a train wreck.
Literally a train wreck.
Yeah.
There could not be a better word for it.
Yeah, exactly. So now a lot of times, we and you hear this specifically, especially because if you're, at a hearing at a local government and folks are there and they are so angry. They're angry at growth. They're angry because there's a new development coming in that's got, apartments, especially on Highway 150. We hear, and see, and just the emotional anger emotions that is attached around these decisions at the local level. And a lot of it is, some of them do or don't like multifamily development, which means apartments or condos or stuff like that. But really, it all stems down to, I think, traffic, right? I mean, that's because you feel anger when you're sitting in traffic and you cannot get to the store or to work or to church on time. And so that's the anger. But tell me, because you're so good at explaining this stuff so folks can understand, what is the role of that local government, especially when it comes to traffic? And can they stop these growth projects? I mean, what legally, what's the framework around that? Kind of help explain all of that.
Well, there's three types of decisions that happen at the local level. There's, of course, your administrative decisions, which are just decisions that are not policy-based, but they're based on policy that's been made, and they don't require any subjectivity. Those are like sign ordinances and stuff like that. Then you get into some decisions which are quasi-judicial, which allow for some subjectivity, but are also dealt with under the law. Those are actual judicial hearings. There's no lobbying that goes on. It's an actual fact-finding thing. And as long as the individual, which applies for the permit or the special use permit, goes in and says, hey, look, I've met all of the requirements per under the statute, that they can get it. And oftentimes when towns try to deny folks special use permits who have done a good job of showing they meet the criteria, the courts will come in and overturn that. So they'll actually give them special use permit, whether or not the town wants to give it to them. The most latitude towns have are in what are called legislative decisions. Those legislative decisions are around a couple of different things. The first is the enactment of the development ordinances, and there's different types of development ordinances. But in 2019, the North Carolina General Assembly enacted 160D, which is the Unified Development Ordinance Reorganization and Land Use Planning Statute. Now, that statute did actually expand the allowance of municipalities for what they could and could not regulate. But you know what they didn't do? They did not allow municipalities to turn down projects because of transportation.
Right.
That specific issue, and whether or not the project is used for rent or for own, are not issues by which that the towns can reject projects. I mean, there is a significant amount of latitude as to whether or not a project meets the actual land use plan and whether or not it meets the ordinances, but that is a legislative decision that ultimately is going to be in the town's purview. And this is a situation where towns have so little say over their own transportation projects because of the way the federal government mandates the multiple jurisdictional planning units. And we all know that here, and you deal with that all the time. But you're dealing with, at this point in time, you've got the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization, which comprises of Union, Iredell, and Mecklenburg. Well, of course, Charlotte and Mecklenburg, the way the votes are allocated, they have a vast majority of the say. And unfortunately, they also have a vast majority of the votes. Now, the funny part about that is, guess where a vast majority of the growth has been?
Where?
Not Charlotte. Outside Charlotte. So, and it's funny because every time there's a local paper here, the Charlotte Ledger, which has Steve Harrison is the reporter from WFAE, and Tony Massey at the Charlotte Ledger and Steve Harrison at WFAE started this fun little blog called Transit Time, and it is fantastic. They bring up all kinds of stuff that they're discovering that's wrong with the system. But what they found was, in the actual population growth of our region, a vast majority of the actual growth for the municipal service district, which is the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area, it happened outside of the city of Charlotte and the county of Mecklenburg.
Wow.
It happened in all of our surrounding counties, and they experienced all this growth while Charlotte is still taking all of the money from the Transportation Planning Organization and putting it into areas that they feel need to be redone and reserved. So essentially what could and should happen is there needs to be a discussion about where growth is happening the most, where those funds are most desperately needed, and how we're going to get people around, because you can't build a transit system to connect people from Belmont to Mooresville. It's just not going to happen, like at this point. So the only way to get them from one place to another is to be able to get them on the road. So we're going to have to expand our road network. Does that mean we can't do transit in the future? No, it absolutely does not. But at this point in time, given that most of the growth is going to be in a lot of these suburban rural areas, you got to put the vast majority of the funding into road construction, primarily for the reason, and bringing it back full circle to what you talked about. More people sit in congestion in this state than anywhere else in this region. And it's because historically there has been difficulty in the way these projects are done. And God bless the engineers and the architects and the consultants and everybody else that makes money on these transportation projects. But you know this as well as I do. We have got to get more dollars into the roads and out of the hands of the consultants and do everything we can. And that is a function of DOT. And again, that's a failing of Governor Cooper. Mm-hmm. That is a function of CRTPO, which is a failure at this point, I think, in terms of the way Charlotte runs it and the way Mecklenburg County runs it. And I think to a certain extent, God bless Ron Pappas, who's the chair of CRTPO. He's from Waxhaw. He can't even get enough people. Like, Charlotte and Mecklenburg and one other town can vote, and they'll outvote all of them. So they're all just trying to make it work. But I think to a certain extent, the people have got to be able to communicate to their legislative folks to say, if we're this upset about it, we want you to redo the way that these MPOs are organized. Mm-hmm. And that is not a problem with the town. That is not a local. It's not even something you can do by yourself. Mm-hmm. It is something that there has to be some form of overall reform that allows for more funds to get to more roads to allow for congestion to be eased.
100%. So well said. You're exactly right. And that's something that we have worked on. I mean, we're modernizing legislatively how we take money into the Department of Transportation. We're shoring up some of these other areas that the department oversees, like the ferry division. That's just turned out to be just a bucket of money into which we pour a lot of dollars in. They're not going into road construction. We're doing all of these things, but really at the heart of the problem is at the local level. And how do you administer those funds to get the most dollars to get more roads paved? That is absolutely, you are right. And it is so many thievedoms in the transportation world. Everybody has their little niche, and it's very difficult to break down those barriers and get people to work together. So that's why I'm so grateful for your advocacy in the area, because you see it day in and day out, professionally and politically, don't you?
No, and that's the thing is, like, the number one issue we have is, and this is a funny issue, you deal with off-site improvements, right?
Yeah.
And towns are stuck in a bad spot because they know that they need these transportation improvements. So again, the development community is asked to foot the bill, and the response back to the towns is, why are we paying for off-site improvements when y'all have a gas tax, y'all have all this other money, and y'all and look, I don't have any bad feelings for any of these towns and municipalities who tell me they don't have a lot of money when they may or may not have spent all that money on pickleball. So, I mean, there's a certain level of, did you spend your ARPA money on pickleball? Oh, you didn't spend it on roads? Oh, well, that was your fault then, wasn't it? I want that money for that pickleball court.
Oh, I love it. Well, Larry, we are out of time, but I am so thankful for today, and I want to make sure I'll share this broadcast with a lot of folks, because you're so informative and very helpful, and I appreciate your support and your time today in the show.
No, you're very welcome, ma'am. Thank you for doing what you're doing up there.
Sir.
Keep doing it. We're so grateful to have you.
Yes, sir. Same here. Thank you so much for everybody. Everybody, have a wonderful 4th of July. I'm going to be out at the Troutman Parade and then also the Mooresville Parade. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone, and just enjoy this beautiful place that we call home. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
News Talk WSIC Statesville.